Before we start the video, I'm doing a Soul Reaper Axe from scratch series on twitch.tv Kriibus right now, so after you're done with this video, come say hi to me on twitch.tv Kriibus and let's discuss this update together. All links are in the description. Okay, let's start the video. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I think Desert Treasure 2 is one of the best updates in Oldschool Runescape history, and trust me, these words do not come lightly to me. For anyone who has watched my videos before, you know I try to be as fair as possible about anything related to this game. Yes, sometimes a little bias creeps in, but overall when something feels out of place, I call it out. When something feels right, I praise it to the maximum. And this update, well, this time it's the latter, and I want to give you 5 reasons why you should firstly try it out yourself, and secondly why I think this is genuinely one of my favorite updates of all time. There are gonna be chapters in this video, so feel free to jump around and see whatever fits your mind the most, and with that being said, let's start with point number 1, the quest itself. First of all, this video will have heavy spoilers about the quest and everything around it. If you want to discover everything yourself, consider skipping at least the quest part of the video. You have been warned. So, the quest itself. Before it was released, Jagex stated that this was gonna be the longest, the hardest, the most difficult quest in the history of this game. And that is a tough assignment to complete. You are putting yourself on the spot if you say these things, and luckily, I think they were right in this case. It definitely felt the longest. It took me a little bit over 8 hours to complete the quest itself from start to finish. I saw some people manage to complete it in like 5 or 6 hours, but for once in my life I wasn't the stereotypical space parking and actually tried to take in the scenery, the stories, the new places that were built, and the puzzles they showcased. And honestly, all of it made the experience miles better than my usual questing adventure. I have done Quest Point Cape on 3 accounts now, in all my years of gameplay, and I've completed certain quests probably dozens of times. But everything I saw with this quest was absolutely brand new. The game felt more alive than ever. Yes, the overview of the quest is very simple concept. You have 4 bosses that you need to kill during the quest like you had in Desert Treasure 1, and before you get to those 4 bosses you have 4 puzzles that you need to complete. And after all of that is done, you get to the final boss. If you put it on paper, that is a very simple concept itself, but it's how Jagex managed to bring all 4 areas alive is what made the difference here. Let me explain. Oftentimes when you're playing any other AAA game, you look for these puzzles to solve them. Usually that's like a core part of the game. For instance, take games like Red Dead Redemption, Legend of Zelda, Portal 2, God of War, and so many others. Puzzles and exploring in those games is what makes them good. But it seems oftentimes in Oldschool Runescape, players just want to skip everything and immediately move to the bosses, aka the so-called space parkings. Now, I also used to be one of those people until I completed the quest for Tombs of a Mascot called Beneath Cursed Sands, and I made a video about it, how it took me about 4 hours to complete the quest without a guide, and I thoroughly enjoyed the entire experience. It was so much fun figuring everything out myself. And somehow with this quest it gets even better. One of my favorite parts was the Stranglewood. The developers managed to build this entire minigame out of an area that at first was a little confusing, but once you start to understand the details, it becomes this sort of like hide and seek minigame inside the quest. Basically the entire area is filled with zombies and you have to sneakily walk around and get the items required. It's a classic quest for a game like Last of Us, but I never thought you can put something like this into Oldschool RuneScape. You don't want to step on branches to make noise. You don't want to run to make noise. You have to lure the monsters away from the back and kill them quietly. You have to stay behind corners and keep distance at all times. You have to go through parts of the forest and cross bridges at the right moments. Everything felt alive, and it genuinely was a scary moment because if you mess up, you suddenly have this pack of zombies after you that you basically can't run away from. And at the left top corner you have this bar that keeps filling up over time and you always have to keep a close eye out. Honestly, it felt like a perfect adventure story. The second puzzle I really enjoyed was the Whisperer puzzle. Now, when I did it during the quest, I actually wasn't that fond of it, because I got stuck on the puzzle for 90 minutes and I just couldn't figure out the right answer. I also talked to a few other players as well, and it seemed like most people were struggling with this part the most. But after I completed the quest, I went to hunt the bosses, and I looked back on what parts I liked and I didn't like about the quest, and I came to the realization that the Shadow Realm puzzle was probably the most unique experience I've ever had playing this game. You have 2 worlds, the one we live in and the Shadow Realm. which is exact replica of the location but for the lost souls. And you have to maneuver between the worlds because you can only do certain tasks at each world. Every time you go to the Shadow Realm, you slowly go insane. So you have a limited time being there before you have to teleport out, but there are items that either help you prolong the process or stay there forever. But you can only place these items in the real world, so it becomes this coordination between the two worlds to complete the puzzle. Honestly, all of this combined, it seems like throughout the years of trial and error with puzzles and quest bosses, Jagex finally got to a point where everything felt challenging enough, but also fairly achievable if you figure it out. Like with the quest version of bosses, for me at least, it was always attempt number 1, figure out the mechanics of the boss, and attempt number 2 and 3, complete the boss, and that was for every case. You go in, you learn, and then you complete, which I felt was a very healthy way to look at it. And of course you get funny cases like this, which I felt were intentional, where the mysterious figure came out of nowhere and tried to attack you. For me, the funniest part was when it came to my POH while I was restoring my stats, and I ended up just spam clicking my restoring pool to get my stats to full every time it attacked me, which made it deal 0 damage. Overall, the dialogue felt real, there was a few jokes, there was so much great lore revealed, and it was a very unique experience. Like there was a case where you had to type in all the boss names to find data information about them at the start of the quest, and I thought that was a really unique way to showcase where to go and how to start. Unfortunately, typing in hot single ladies around me showcased 0 data results, which I thought was an obvious scam because that's not true at all. But you know what, I'll forgive you for this one, Jagex. And the best part about all of this was that after the final fight, we find out that this is just the beginning. It seems like the Majorat storyline will continue, and hopefully they manage to outdo themselves in the future. If there was one downside for this, it would be that it actually was really freaking long, and not all players have time to put 6 hours into a single quest, because in this day of TikTok and ADHD, players rarely have the patience to take everything in, which is a shame honestly, but overall everything about this quest felt challenging but fair, and it was an amazing feeling to be finally done with the quest as well. Extremely fulfilling experience. And with that, we're done with the quest, so let's talk about the bosses. Now, first things first, there are 3 versions of the bosses. The one you fight during the quest, the one you fight after the quest, and the awakened versions, aka the hard difficulty with extra mechanics. This was meant so for the people who are not experienced with PvM can still complete the quest, and people who wanna hunt the drops of the bosses can continue to do so afterwards with the added difficulty. And I think there are only a handful of people who have completed the awakened versions, but more and more are able to take on these challenges as time goes on. In this video, I only want to talk about the versions, which is the one you can hunt after the quest. Now, I hunted the bosses about 40 hours in the last 4 days, so on average like 10 hours per day, and I think I have a good grasp on the overall ideas and how these bosses work. Every boss is very unique, they have their own style, but the theme overall seems very similar. Each boss has usually 3 mechanics and they juggle between those 3. One thing I really enjoy is that you can do all of the bosses with relatively cheap gear. The Duke can be killed with Arclight, the Blowpipe is really good at Leviathan, the Whisperer can be done with Toxic Staff, and Vardorvis can be done with Abyssal Tentacle. All of the weapons I mentioned cost less than 3 million GP, and you will have a decent chance to get the kills. Of course, the higher you go with Fang, Bofa, Sight, or even Tumek and Shadow, the faster your kills are also gonna be. So far, I have around 500 KC with all 4 bosses combined, and honestly, there is very little bad things I can say about them. There are a few nitpicks here and there, like the fact that at the start of every KC in Duke, I have to make new potions, which takes like an extra minute. I think the best option would be to just have an infinite potion at certain KC, because at that point you already proven that yes, indeed I really can make this potion myself. One of the reasons why I like the bosses though is that they are very mechanically heavy, meaning if you do every mechanic correctly, oftentimes you take almost 0 damage, and it feels very satisfying to step at the right time, to use the right prayers, to control your character in the right way, and each boss has that option. At the same time, if you do something wrong, you also get heavily punished, so it makes you work harder to get the perfect kill, which also, for the first time in this game, I think has an added benefit. Basically, if you get a perfect kill at the boss, meaning you don't mess up any of the mechanics, you get more loot. For instance, at Duke, if I get a perfect kill, I can get 7 Dragon Plate Legs as a drop. But if I mess some of the mechanics up, I only get 5 Dragonblade legs. So it makes you push harder, and after I get the perfect kill, it feels so much more satisfying knowing that my efforts paid off. This also only works for the common loot, meaning that you can mess up the mechanics and still have an exactly the same chance to roll a unique drop. It pretty much showcases that players who are perfectionists just get rewarded a little bit more, but if you make mistakes, you still have exactly the same chance to roll at the high table drops. My favorite out of the 4 bosses so far is the Whisperer. It has this beautiful rhythm to it. Everything is exactly how it's supposed to be, and it is so satisfying to get it right. You attack, you move, you pray, you attack, you move, you pray, and it just works so well together. You can literally take 0 damage the entire fight if you do everything correctly, and it really felt like my efforts were paying off. If I was slacking at the Whisperer, you bet your butt I had to eat like 5 manta rays to stay alive. On day 1, after streaming for 16 hours, I got so exhausted that there was actually moments where I had to teleport out, which was entirely my fault. I messed up and I paid the price. It felt fair. If you did everything right, you got the loot. If you messed up, you had to start again. Each boss required their own weapons to kill, and again, for bosses like Leviathan, having a blowpipe which was 3 million GP is actually better DPS than something like a Twisted Bow, which is high-end gear, and that makes it so much more accessible for a lot more players. Overall, it feels like the bosses are mechanically challenging, but like with everything else, practice makes perfect. For all of the bosses, it took me like 5 KC to figure out how the bosses works, and from there on out, it was just smooth sailing. I'm really happy they are more challenging and not just another copy-paste of Vorkat or Salra. And with that, let's talk about the drops these bosses give. The drops you get so far have been the most controversial topic, and for a good reason. Jagex implemented a new drop system specifically for the best new rings in the game. Basically how the system works is that the new rings are essentially similar mechanic like the Brimstone ring, where you need 3 different parts to combine it together. However, with these rings, the first 2 parts are invisible shards that you don't actually see, and when you get the 3rd shard, you get the entire ring from the boss right away. The purpose here is to ensure that nobody can snipe rings at 1 KC, and secondly, nobody can go dry on these rings. So in the long term, it balances itself out. So the TLDR is that it's basically like a bad luck protection mechanic. In the long term, it's good for the betterment of the game because players usually get the drop around the drop rate. There is still chance to get spooned, but you don't get cases like the Dragon Warhammer, which is 1 in 5,000 drop rate, but some players had to kill 20,000 to get it. These cases will most certainly not happen with the new bosses. However, we also get cases where on day 1, over 500,000 bosses were killed and exactly 0 rings entered the game, because the system also worked as an anti-spoon mechanic, so you got both sides of the coin. Now on day 5, the rings are slowly starting to enter the game and everything seems to balance itself out as time goes on. The other aspect of the drops are the fact that oftentimes you literally get nothing. There are cases where my Whisperer KC takes 4 minutes and intense mechanical gameplay, and as a result I get 120 Mind Runes or 3 Manta Rays, which just feels terrible as a player. It's not rewarding at all, but I also see the upside why this is the case. The rings are currently hundreds of millions of GP. The Virtus rope set is also over 100 million GP, and the Soul Reaper axe is currently max cash tag, meaning well over 2 billion GP with a B. The unique drops on these bosses are extremely valuable, meaning let's say you do the boss for 50 hours and you get the ring drop. You go sell that ring for 250 million GP and now you made 5 million GP an hour, which is extremely fair in my opinion. Not to mention during that ring drop you had a chance to get multitude of other unique rewards as well. So even though you can't get the ring drop on let's say 2KC, you can still spoon every other unique from the boss. Take me for instance, I got one of the pieces of Soul Reaper axe in 18 KC from Vartorvis, which currently is assumed to be 1 in 500 drop rate, so the element of surprise is still there, and at the same time you know you can't go dry in these bosses as well. So far the only unique I've gotten is Virtus Mask and I sold that for 20 million GP. I'm still waiting for that big drop, and like I said at the start of the video, I am going for the Soul Reaper axe, so hopefully that cash out will be worth it at the end. I like the system. I think it could have worked even better if there wasn't 4 bosses, because at the start a lot of players want to try out all the contents, but currently it feels like you don't want to leave one boss until you get the drop, because if you swap to other bosses you basically have to start all over again. But in the long run the drop system is really healthy for the game, as none of the bosses have common drops like 100 ranars or 200 mahogany planks, which means it's very bare bone on the resource parts, so you have to heavily invest into the unique drops. Okay, and let's talk about the final 2 things. I'm gonna make it simple and fast here. Those 2 things are the music that was released with the quest and the entire theme of the quest, which are both absolutely 10 out of 10. There is a reason why every YouTube content creator who doesn't play RuneScape uses the songs from RuneScape. Its simplicity yet beauty is unmatched. It is so good in this quest. It sets the vibe and the feel perfectly for each area and boss, and I just can't stop listening to it. My favorite part of any of the new songs released is the Vartorvis final phase fight. It's an absolute slam dunk, and I can't 100% confirm this, but I think Maud Ash composed that song, in which case, like, seriously, what can't this guy do? I mean, he's perfect. He's literally perfect. Let me just show you like a 10-second part of the song. Listen to this. This is so freaking good. Oh my god, and if you put the fact that this kicks in exactly when the boss is like 10% HP left and everything is flying everywhere and it's like pure chaos, and you get the KC finally at the last beat drop, I mean, it just like hits you differently in every way possible. And this goes on for all 4 bosses. I highly recommend you turn the music on during the fights. It adds an entirely different layer to your gameplay, and everyone who hasn't done it is being left out at this point. They nailed the music, and I'm happy this has become a big part of Oldschool Runescape now. The same happened with Maspa, the same happened with Raids 3. The music in the last few years has been absolute banger, and I love it. And finally, let's talk about the theme of the quest overall, which, I mean, you already know what I'm gonna say. Everything comes together perfectly. When you visit certain locations, you can feel it. When I was in the Stranglewood and a spooky piano was playing on the background, I had to play hide and seek. Everything felt infected. The colors, schematics, it felt abandoned. It was just 10 out of 10 all around. When I went to the Shadow Realm, exactly the same feel. I was doing puzzles in the Scar. You felt kinda trapped, in a good way, I guess. The smoke was filling your lungs. You felt like you had to do puzzles faster because you were taking slowly damage. It felt real, as weird as it sounds, which I think was the intention in the first place. Every location has its unique theme, and it feels exactly the criteria I was looking for in the quest this size. The next time I'm gonna complete Desert Treasure 2 on another account, I genuinely am not gonna open any guides and just try to experience it once again, because it truly was worth it. In conclusion, I give this update a solid 9 out of 10. There are a few nitpicks here and there with the drops, the bosses, but overall the feeling was nothing like I've ever felt before, and as time goes on, I've started to appreciate the work more and more, starting with artists like Maud Cher that put all of those amazing bosses together, ending with storylines from Maud Ed, who has basically worked on this quest for years now. I'm really happy I got to experience this, and I hope you give it a try as well if you haven't yet. I'm gonna go back to now grinding for my Soul Reaper axe, and if you wanna be part of that, come visit me at twitch.tv/Kriibus. But for the rest, I'll see you all tomorrow with another video. I love you all very much. Bye.